Still on the crisis in Sudan, the military government has asked protesters to take down their roadblocks in the capital, Khartoum. Demonstrators have been manning barricades leading to the military headquarters, which has been the focus of the protests that helped lead to the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir. On Sunday, protest leaders said they had ended contact with the military council that removed the president. They accused it of being composed of remnants of Mr. Bashir's regime, while insisting that it is responsible, for the security of the country. The military says it is committed to handing over power and will consider a joint military-civilian council. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have agreed to send Sudan $3 billion worth of aid, throwing a lifeline to the country's new military leaders. The two Gulf Arab countries will deposit $500 million with the Sudanese Central Bank and send the rest in the form of food, medicine and petroleum products. The aid comes amid wrangling between the Transitional Military Council and protesters and opposition groups who are demanding that civilians lead a 2-year transitional period. The aid from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates is the first major publicly announced assistance to Sudan from Gulf states in several years. Let's get more on this story now from an African affairs analyst at Chike Chide. Thank you for taking the time to join us on Network Africa today.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
So a lot's been happening with Sudan in recent weeks. What do you make of Saudi Arabia and the UAE's decision today to send $3 billion worth of aid to Sudan?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense under the circumstances. And then, of course, obviously there is a growing relationship between these three countries. Obviously with Sudan, and of course you know that Sudan has also pledged support for the battle that's been going on in Yemen also. So I think that's the essence of international diplomacy and the friendship that exists between both sides. And of course we also know that it is going to be very timely, the aid that they are bringing to Sudan. Of course we know that what led to the present crisis and the ouster of Bashir from power by the military is as a result of the protests. What was responsible for the protests? The dire economic situation in Sudan, the imposition of austerity measures in Sudan, the valuation of the currency, again the removal of subsidy, especially on bread and fuel. So this has also contributed massively to a very reduced, if I use that expression, standard of living among Sudanese, the grinding poverty in that particular country. All of these things helped precipitate the crisis, the protests constantly that we were seeing on the streets of Sudan, until the military had no choice than to come in and then take over and remove al-Bashir from power. So obviously this aid from these countries is supposed to address the immediate economic needs of Sudan. But of course that in itself has a downside, and that is right now you do not exactly have a government in place in Sudan. So where is the money going to go to? Is it going to the military council that has not yet exactly taking charge of Sudanese affairs, of course, because you have people on the streets talking about what should constitute the transition going forward in the Sudan.
Yeah, well, the protesters have been a driving force in the whole ousting of President Omar al-Bashir, and now it seems that the military is getting a bit impatient. Well, the protesters are also getting a bit impatient. Just last night, they said that they've cut out all communication with the Sudanese military.
Yeah. Now
that the military is saying that the protesters have to stop, protesting, for example, they're saying that they have to stop the barricades to the military headquarters. Yeah. What other options do the protesters have now?
Obviously, it's inevitable that if both sides, continue on the path of intransigence, refusing to compromise or negotiate with one another, there's going to be a showdown sooner or later. And of course, there have been those within the military hierarchy who, have been debating about the best means to stem what is going on, the protests and all of that. And the military, has also made some kind of concession about, the transition, program, the composition. I mean, the transition council, the composition of transition council. They agree that it's not going to be an all-military affair. But I think the protesters are saying that they want a greater input in what is going to constitute the military transition. Especially, they have also themselves considered the fact that the military component would also be included, in that council. But they are also talking about the leadership of that council. And so I hope very soon that both sides will begin to come, sit down and begin to talk, because sooner or later you're going to have a very violent confrontation between the military and then the protesters.
Yeah.
And of course, ultimately at the end of the day, if we look at what happened in Egypt when we saw similar, mass participation of the Egyptians. I mean, for quite some time, until the military now decided that enough was enough and they decided to move on the streets. That in itself could, in a way, be a bit of a problem and could lead to, all manners of crisis if that is done. So I expect that both sides, would open the door and begin to talk to one another.
Achike, I want to ask, what role do you think the African Union can play in this? I think it was on Monday, they said that they were giving the Sudanese military an ultimatum to hand power to a civilian government, but it's been a bit quiet. What role are they meant to play in this?
Well, I think they have been doing that. The reality is that they can still do much more. Of course, the interventions they make also, especially if they are quite serious about it and they are not, they don't play politics with it. If they are very forthright, forthcoming in the pronouncements that they make, pronouncements that do not leave any form of ambiguity of any kind. I think that will go a very long way in cautioning the military establishment, especially to know that that they are isolated. And I think the position of the AU really would end up to a very large extent isolating the regime in Sudan, because AU, of course, will not be doing it alone. They will be doing it in concert with other international partners, the European Union, the United States, and all of that. So it's all about bringing all the arsenals that they have at their disposal to put the right kind of pressure on the military. The military in Sudan. Yeah,
we'll see how everything plays out. African Affairs Analyst Achike Chude, thank you for speaking to us on Network Africa.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Tenny.
Thank you.